Hello, this is Kyle Stallones. We're here at the Tomball Museum Center. It's January 19, 2024. We're here today with Nadine Martens Reed, and this is our oral history project, recording the recollections of some of the families that have made this area such a great place to live. You can see this video and our other videos at our YouTube channel at Tomball Museum. Would you give us your full name for us, Nadine?
Nadine Lynette Martens Reed.
And tell us about your family.
Well, I have to really go back to my great-grandmother because she and her husband were the ones that bought our ranch that started everything. Emma Fritz actually lost her father when she was only 3 years old. And her mother was Maria Bridegam, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Bridegam name, probably more than the Martens. Since she lost her father, her mother married a Gus Seidel. And he really became her father because she couldn't remember her own father. And he raised her. And an interesting thing is she was engaged to someone, and I never got the name of the person she was engaged to, but he died in World War I. And so she married, they called him Fritz, but and that was kind of funny because her last name was Fritz, but she married a Fritz. But he was W.C. Friedrich Martens, and that's M-A-R-T-E-N-S. I've had to spell my name my whole life because everybody wants to make it with an I. But when she married him, they bought property on Telge and 2920, of course. That wasn't 2920 probably at the time, but it was about 354 acres. And it was originally, at that time it was owned by Daniel Werner, and it was in the herd survey that they got it from. But they built a house there, and they had actually 3 children, and she was pregnant with the 4th. One of those children died after 3 months, but my grandfather was her oldest child. And when he was 6 years old, his father died. He died from some kind of fever. Some say it might have been malaria or something, you know.
So when was the house built?
The house was built, the original part of the house was built when they got married. November 2nd, 1893 is when they got married. And approximately, well, actually, we've owned the ranch since 1895. That's when they purchased the land. So they were farmers. And when her husband died, she was pregnant with my great aunt Annie Freilich. Annie Martens Freilich. She was pregnant, so she went back home to her parents until she had the baby. And then her her half-brothers, she had 2 half-brothers. One was Emil Seidel and one was Otto Seidel. And they came and they would break the ground for her, but she planted the seed, and they were farmers. And to make extra money, she would take in boarders, especially children that need to be confirmed, because we lived close to Salem Lutheran Church. And so sometimes it was hard for the families to get the kids in to be able to get confirmed, so she would take them in as boarders. And, just lived as farmers and lived off the land, and her half-brothers would help her some. But she chose not to remarry because she said men just weren't worth it because they all died on her. So she just didn't want to get married again. So she lived in that house till she passed away in, it was 1942 when she passed away. But at 6 years old, my grandfather became the man of the house. And so he remodeled the house in 1928 and added on to it. And this was Emma. She lived with him then until she died.
So this is Emma Fritz Martens?
This is Emma Fritz Martens.
And she was married to Fritz Martens, and he's the one that died young?
Right. And he was a fairly good-looking guy here. This is their wedding picture when they got married.
And it looked to me like, so I've heard the Seidel name quite a bit, especially over near the cemetery, near the Methodist Church in Rose Hill.
That is where most of my relatives are buried, yes.
The Seidels. but it sounded like on the Martens and Fritz side, y'all were going to the Salem church back then?
We did. Some of my relatives started Salem Lutheran Church. I can't tell you which one, but I do know that some did. Actually, my whole family. I mean, I was raised and married there, but we did change to Zion back in the early 90s. And then we're at Zion for a long time. And just recently we started going to St. Matthew in Westfield, which I've enjoyed because, you and I both have Pastor Bogues as a old-time friend, and he's the pastor there. Right. He's a wonderful pastor.
So the Seidels, have you ever heard stories about them or how long they lived in this area?
Not a whole lot about how long they've lived in this area, but we did discover an interesting thing today. When we were looking at it, we realized that the man we called Uncle Emil all the time, that was married to my Grandma Martens, which was a Henrichs, her sister Ida was her oldest sister, and she was quite a bit older than my grandmother. She married her, let's see if we can get this right. My grandma, Amanda Henrichs Martens. Her sister, Ida Henrichs, was Ida Henrichs Seidel, married to Emil Seidel, who actually was her mother-in-law's half-brother.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
Well, I had heard.
And we didn't realize that. And Uncle Emil actually was the Democratic precinct judge for years. And if you take Rose Hill Cypress Road and kind of go around the corner, one of the houses is still there. They took the curve out, but on the curve, there was a little house that they started out living in that was where everybody went to vote for years and years and years. And when he got older, my grandpa, Gustav William Herbert, and he went by Herbert or GWH, he became the Democratic precinct judge. And then he died in 1950, when did he die?
This says 1954.
1954. He was 58 years old when he died. It was very suddenly. Then my dad was the Democratic precinct judge. Now, I will tell a secret that probably wasn't much of a secret. He was the Democratic precinct judge until almost when he died, but he was voting Republican quite a while. But he had good friends that were Democrats. So, but it just was something he did as a public service that he, in those days, Daddy didn't believe in saying you were one or the other, really. He believed in voting for the person. Grandma and Grandpa, this is GWH or Gustav William Herbert and Amanda Wilhelmina Henrichs Martens. Kind of how they got together is Grandpa Charlie liked to play the fiddle, and my grandma liked to dance. Grandpa didn't like to dance, but he kind of put. He made his feelings known at a dance that Grandma was dancing with someone else, and he danced to take her away from another beau she had. So he loved Grandma dearly, and they said he was a man I always wanted to meet. That's one of the first people besides Jesus that I want to meet in heaven, because no one ever had an unkind word to say about my grandfather. They said he was a jolly man. He always told jokes. He loved everybody. And he had a nickname for Grandma was Shotzi, for sweetheart. And Daddy said he could always get around Grandma. If they wanted to do anything special, they'd always go to his daddy and get him to convince their mother, because he could work his way around Grandma. Now, the Frelicks, my mother was a Frelick. So we had some double kin on the Frelick side.
What was your mother's full name?
My mother's full name was Marion Maxine Frelick Martens.
How does she tie in with the Rosehill Frelics? Did you look
She's
at
the
that?
Rosehill Frelick. She is the Rosehill Frelics.
So we had one Frelick that was the feed store and one Frelick that was the hardware store.
Okay. Irvin Frelick was my mother's cousin, and Laverne Frelick was my daddy's cousin. So we were double kin to them, and that was Norman was Irvin's brother, so he was a cousin also.
Norman had the hardware store, and Irvin had the feed store.
Right, and we at times got feed from Irvin. We had such a big business at the time when I was little that we had feed delivered. And had our own storage silos for the feed. So, and that was kind of interesting. Now, we found something. Now, Daddy and Mama both. How Daddy met Mama was at Cypress High School. And I know that's not Tomball, but it was odd that Telgi was the dividing road for Cypress High School and Tomball High School.
That's what we had heard. I think Bruce Hilligeist saw that in his ancestors. A lot of his ancestors went to Cyprus just because they were zoned.
It was the dividing road. Yeah. And funny, Daddy was only 5'10", but he was a star basketball player. He did not miss a free throw.
And what was his full name?
Leonard Charles. Well, no, it wasn't Charles. We still don't know what his middle name was. There's an odd story behind that. He was known as L.C. Martens when Leonard Bradingham was born because everybody started calling little Leonard Leonard. So, but Daddy was Leonard, and he said his middle name was Charles Martens. And he said it so much, it is actually on legal documents. Well, when my youngest son was born, we named him Jonathan Charles Reed. And Ray's father's name was Charles, and my father's middle name was Charles. So I tell my dad, we did that in honor of you. And he looks so sheepish, and for the first time in my life, he tells me, that's really not my middle name. He didn't like his middle name. I think it was Calvin. I think, but I'm not sure. Because I don't think it's even on his birth certificate. But he liked his Grandpa Charlie so much. He really loved him, and he wanted it to be Charles, so he just told everybody that. When he graduated from high school, he, at the time, it was not that long after the Depression, I guess, because it was 44, I think, when he 1944, when he graduated from high school. He decided he wanted to go to work at the bank, like Roy Hilligeist. And my grandpa had already had his oldest son, Milbert, which his nickname was Pee-wee, had left home at 16 and become a mechanic. Then he was in the military, and then, he kind of felt like he lost his oldest son because he'd moved on and was doing something else. Well, running a farm and ranch isn't that easy by yourself. And he wanted Daddy to work with him and then, inherit the ranch. So he went to Mr. Kiefer, who was one of the owners of the bank. And he said, now, I don't want you to not hire him because he's a good employee. But I want you to make this job sound the worst you can possibly make it. So he'll be ready to work with me on the farm. So Daddy said when he came home, he said, well, what happened? He said, well, I tell you what, I'd almost have to pay him to work there. So I don't guess I'll work there. So then they got together and they started what they originally called, and this is kind of interesting here, they originally called the business the Martens Poultry Farm. I don't know if you can see this real good. But they actually raised fryers for a while, and then they went into the egg business together. And I'm sorry, I dropped this here. I found this article, and this is really interesting, and that's how he won the jackets. He got this presented from Purina Feeds. He actually kind of advertised for them. They did an article in the paper about how well the Purina feed had worked with his chickens. So it says here that his laying hens, 1,000 laying hens, averaged 680 eggs a day on Purina feed. And that's pretty good. But you can see him here. I had another picture, and I could not find it, of Daddy in the chicken house with him. Now, at this time, you went in the chicken house and you picked up all the eggs with a basket. And that was pretty intensive work. Then you'd hand wash them and sell them. And so Daddy, as time went by, he was, people think of farmers as not being smart, but my dad was very, very smart. He really got into the business. He got into the marketing side of it. He was a very likable person, was very good at being a public speaker. And he was able to sell his product very well. And they discovered that there was another Martens poultry farm. So I don't know if this happened after his father died, because his father was only 58 when he died. And so it wasn't really that long. In fact, my sister, I don't know if she was even born yet when Grandpa died. She was born. She was just very small. She was like 2 or 3 years old, I guess. And when he died, then I think that's probably when Daddy changed the name. It might have been a little bit before that. But he did change the name of the business to Leonard's Eggs, because there wasn't anybody using that name at the time. And so it was better marketing that way. And Daddy sold eggs everywhere in Tomball. He sold them at Klein's grocery store. In fact, if you had Klein's eggs, you had Daddy's eggs. I couldn't find one of the old Klein's cartons, but we did sell their eggs, provide their eggs. But Daddy was really into marketing, so he not only had the Leonard's Eggs, select eggs, he had and the Leonard's jumbo eggs. And those were his. But he also decided, and he only did this in the Tomball area, he had Rose Hill eggs. And it was funny how marketing makes a difference in how your eggs are sold. Some people just really loved the idea of Rose Hill eggs and didn't realize they were the same eggs. But Daddy originally had the white leghorn chickens, and then he found it started in that period where people got the idea that brown eggs were the way to go. And so Daddy said, okay, I'm going to get me some brown chickens, and we're going to sell brown eggs. And he came to me because at the time I could draw fairly well. And he had me draw this picture, so I actually drew the little cowboy brown egg that he used on his cartons. Nice. And that it was Leonard's branch style eggs. Now, the only difference between the brown eggs and the white eggs is the shell is thicker. And the brown chickens eat more. So that's one reason you have to charge more for brown eggs, because the chickens eat more. But they were eating the same thing, so the egg really doesn't taste that much different. Now, Daddy got into automation. We had where you, at this time, you basically washed them by hand. He got a machine where you would, you had these suction cup things. We would pick the eggs up on what we call flats, which is 2.5 dozen square flat. And you'd have these suction cup things that would go down on the eggs, pick the eggs up, and it would put it on a conveyor belt. And it would take it through the area of this machine where there were these brushes and soapy water, and it would wash the eggs. The flats would be plastic, and that we picked them up from too, so that you wouldn't ruin the cardboard ones. But the eggs were free on that. Then they would go to this belt that my mother was the one that mostly did the egg killing. I did it some later on. but we called it candling the eggs. They would pass over this light, and you would look for cracked eggs. We would eat the cracked eggs, and because there really wasn't anything wrong with them, but you couldn't sell them. And then blood spots, which would be destroyed. And then it went down this other part, and it would weigh them as it went by. So somebody would stand on the other side to put them in the cartons. So like the jumbos would come off first, and you'd go down the line, and we'd have small, medium, and small. The small eggs, everybody wanted those at Easter time. And, if you're the younger pullets lay smaller eggs. So we were always continually getting in new chickens too. And I remember the only loans my dad ever took out was to automate the chicken houses. And what that entailed, Daddy he would invent things too. Like this chicken house, I remember when I was little, to make it easier on your back, he invented this thing with little wheels on it that you would push down the aisle where you could put the basket on that. So as you picked up the eggs, you'd push it down the aisle, and I would get to ride on it because I was so little.
So like a little cart?
So it was up in the air. Mm-hmm. So it hung from the ceiling.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
It hung from the ceiling because it would be smoother and easier because the floor wasn't always that great.
So this was your grandfather?
That was my grandpa. This was not GWH or Gustav William Herbert. He went by Herbert sometimes or GWH. He was the one that started it.
He started it?
Well, Daddy's business ran for 50 years. Mm-hmm. And he died in 2001. So that would be about 1950 when he started. And before that, they had the poultry. They were raising fryers for quite some time.
Did they sell fryers to the area grocery stores?
I would imagine so. We were related to the Brightigams. We did sell them eggs, so I would assume that they sold them chickens. Now, during the Depression, there was a lot of trading and things like that going on. Like if you had a cow, they had a butchering club where they would butcher a cow, and you would donate a cow, and then every month you got a different part of the cow. And he said that worked really good for a while till people started, somebody might not give as good a cow as somebody else, and times got better, At the height of our business, we had over 30,000 chickens.
Wow. What kind of chicken houses did you have?
Well, that's the thing. That's what I was going to say. The only loan my dad took out was to expand and modernize the chicken houses. So what you put in was, instead of walking between the cages and picking up the eggs, you had cages that were tilted a little bit, and there was a conveyor belt in the middle of them. So you could put more chickens in, and you had this conveyor belt that brought all the eggs to the end for you to pick up. And that was when me and Gail started picking up eggs because we thought it was fun. And Daddy would pay us 3 cents a flat to pick up the eggs.
I guess after a while it'd just be real work, though, wouldn't it?
Oh, it was work. It was work. But Daddy at that point had bought a little electric cart. We were green before there was green. And you would we got to drive the electric cart, so we would pick up eggs. But we originally had 3 chicken houses. We had 4. We had 4 chicken houses back when I was like 5 years old. And when he modernized them, he just took 2 of the houses and made them longer and bigger and more modern. And the others became sheds for tools and things like that. But it had that belt, but then it also had a feeding trough that worked that way too, where a chain would pull the feed down. So you had to be careful. And then a watering trough, same way, But I was, up until I was quite old, I don't remember when the last time I did it, you have to have lights on the chickens for them to think it's spring all the time so that you produce more eggs. So your lights would come on at a certain time so that they thought it was still daylight and they would produce more eggs. So the light bulbs had to be changed. So I was light enough that I could walk on the chicken cages and change the light bulbs for him. And Daddy was very, you don't waste. He learned, growing up in the Depression, you learn not to waste anything. So the chicken manure, I don't know how he kept it from drying out, but it was liquid underneath the cages, not very pleasant to look at. But he had what he called the honey wagon, and he would suction that manure out and fertilize our pasture. Because at the same time that we're having the egg farm, we also had cows. We always had a ranch. Daddy ran Beefmaster cattle, and it really worked great as fertilizer. We never had to buy fertilizer hardly. So, but Mama got the idea of having the hay pasture in the front instead in the back where we'd always had it, because she kind of got tired of driving through manure, and it looked better. It always looked pretty in the front. So that, I credit my mother with that. And she was a hard worker. Mama she managed the business at home, and Daddy did the marketing and the delivering. The only time we had someone besides my dad and Mom delivering eggs was when my uncle worked for us before he went to Vietnam. And that was the only time we got to go on family vacations, because we could trust Uncle Buddy to take care of things while we were gone.
What was his name?
His real name was Paul Freilich Jr., but the family called him Buddy. To the world, he was known as Red. But when he went to Vietnam, that kind of stopped the family vacations. He was like a brother to us, because he was Mama's little brother, and he lived with us some. And because Grandma was 42 when she had him, so Mama and Daddy, they were the young married couple, so Uncle Buddy stayed with them quite a bit, and then they got him to work, on the farm. So my Aunt Laureen would babysit us, and he worked.
So give us an idea roughly where that farm is.
Telge and 2920. We originally owned, as a family, 354 acres. When Grandpa died, they went into the Martens Land and Cattle Company, so that Grandma could gradually give the land to her children. And when they did that, I don't know if Grandma had already passed away. I think she had. But when, now my Aunt Irma Kimmel, whom a lot of people know from Guaranty Bond and Nations and Bank of America, she worked there almost 50 years.
Is she Mike Kimmel?
That's his mother. Okay. His mother. They built a house when I was about 5 years old on the property between the Hilligeist and, next to the Hilligeist. The Hilligeist property runs on one side of their property. So what Daddy was always trying to be as fair to everybody as possible. So what they did when they split the land up is they took the land on 2920, everybody got 4 acres on 2920, and they sold the corner. That's when we sold to Jack in the Box. And that was funny. I always watch when you're selling land, because sometimes they put little clauses in. We could not sell any other land to a Mexican restaurant because they sell tacos at Jack in the Box. For so many years. I think it's up now, But it was funny. We had wanted it taken out, and it didn't get taken out in the clause, so we couldn't sell to, because actually Julio's wanted to buy some land from my cousin, and she couldn't sell to them because we had that clause.
So the 350 acres is the southwest corner of Telge and 2920?
Yes. Telge dead ends into 2920, and that's how I always described it. Telge from 2920 to 290 is 10 miles long. So I'd always say our place was the first driveway on the right from 2920 and the last one on the left from 290.
And y'all's 350 acres was neighbors to Bruce Hilligeist family?
Yes, the Hilligeists have always been our neighbors, good neighbors. And Daddy grew up with Roy. They went to Lutheran school together in high school. And he actually was almost like best friends with his brother Earl. Daddy and Earl were Earl was one of his groomsmen in Mom and Dad's wedding.
Earl Hilligeist.
Yeah, Earl was a hoot. He loved telling jokes, and that's where him and Daddy had a lot in common. Daddy used to get picked to be the MC of a lot of different shows at church, and Daddy was involved in a lot of different things, and loved telling jokes. He had this book of I think it was 2,100 jokes. And what he would do if he was going to give a speech or something, he always threw a few jokes in. Well, he'd come home from delivering eggs and he'd have maybe 10 minutes to get to church, and he's pulling out his joke book. And my mother's saying, "Leonard, you've got to get dressed. You don't know what you're going to say." And she would get all nervous. But Daddy always pulled it off. He would find a joke and he would change it to somebody in the audience. So these are my parents. This is the last picture they had taken before Daddy died.
So that's your full name.
Daddy was Leonard, I think Calvin, but he called himself Charles Martens. And my mother was Marion Maxine Frelick. They were about 4 years apart. Mama was a really good volleyball player. She won awards. Loved Mrs. Arnold. Everybody loved Mrs. Arnold at Cypress. She actually chose to go to school longer than she had to play volleyball. So they got married April 1st. She could have graduated in December for some I guess she had enough credits or whatever, but they didn't get married till April because she went to play volleyball first. But she said he was late to her graduation, and she could see him looking in the window, watching her graduate. And my aunt said he would come and serenade her at their house with a guitar and sing. He did have a good voice. He had a really good voice. He was always in the choir. And, he was involved in a lot of different things. Daddy was always on a board at church. He was everything from the president to the elder to the trustee at Salem and Zion. And he served on the Tall Pines board, which was the community of churches. So when Daddy died, he had 16 pastors at his funeral, which is not happen very often. It actually was on a Wednesday during Lent when they all had to go back to their own congregations and preach that night. So I was impressed with that. And then he was known for his jokes and for his witness. Mama got a whole box full of cards from his customers. And the two things they would always say about him is they were going to miss his jokes and his witness of his faith. But Daddy was always very involved in Farm Bureau. And in 1998, he got the Pioneer Award. Daddy served as a board member and president several times of the Harris County Farm Bureau. And Daddy was a little different than some farmers. He did not believe in farm subsidies. He was very much a capitalist. He believed that if you could not make a living on your farm, then you needed to do something else. And he managed to make a good living for our family for those 50 years. There were some years that were probably light, but I had just mentioned to somebody the other night that every year, we had to wear dresses to school. We would get 5 dresses, so we could have a different dress to wear every day to school. And she said, "Oh my, we didn't have that. You must have had a lot of money." Well, we didn't. If it was light, we didn't know it because they managed to make the money so we could, always dress nice. But it really takes a lot, and that's one reason my mother chose not to try to keep the business going, was every Monday morning he would call the commodities market to find out what egg prices were, to decide, okay, what am I going to charge this week? I mean, the prices literally changed almost every week. And he was very smart with math. He could always figure out his tickets without using a calculator. And I did the book work, and sometimes I double checked him, and I'm like, well, gosh, he does have that right. But he would always know what 15 dozen or 30 dozen was, because he sold to a lot of the local drive-ins and restaurants. He was the one that provided the eggs for Goodson's restaurant and City Cafe. City Cafe was his cousin, by the way. My grandmother's sister was Ella Holdreth. So all the Holdreths were our relatives. And her baby sister was Dora, it was Seidel. And the funny thing is, Aunt Dora Seidel married Herman Seidel, who was Laverne Frelick's parents. His brother married Grandpa's sister, Dora. So we had two Aunt Dora Seidels, one from Daddy's side and one from Grandma's side, or Grandpa's side. And we always called Aunt Dora Seidel from Midland because they lived in Midland. So to differentiate which Aunt Dora we were talking about. And then, of course, we had the Ida Seidel who married Emil Seidel, and then we had Aunt Molly, who married Cron. A lot of people may know Arthur Cron. That was her son, and Irvin Cron, who lived Irvin Cron just lived right behind us. And Alan Cron, all of the Crons kind of have their own little community behind us. They're on Cron Lane. They all built houses right to the west of us. Yeah. Now my grandmother was she could be tough too. She could butcher a chicken herself. And we had this one step, there was this kind of tool shed that had this high step on it. And I think it was purposely just to butcher the chickens. She'd put the chicken's head on it, she would chop it off, and she'd stick it in a sack, tie the sack up and fling it, and then that sack would go all over the place. So when they talk about a chicken with their head cut off, they do run. Mm-hmm. They go all over the place, flop all over the place. So, and then she'd singe the feathers off. And
would they put it like in boiling water to get the feathers off, or what?
She did that, but then she'd singe the ones that were left. She would singe on her open fire on her kitchen. Yeah, so she could do it from. She was a pioneer woman, I guess. Still, she was interesting in that she loved a garden. So she always had a garden, and she canned green beans and okra and pears. We had this old pear tree, and it was the best pears. She would can those. So
I was wondering also about different diseases with that many chickens in that many chicken houses. Mm-hmm. Did you occasionally have problems with different? Occasionally.
One summer, I remember there was some kind of chicken flu or something. And Daddy would go through and cull them so that the others wouldn't get sick. Mm-hmm. And so the sad thing is, when animal rights people probably wouldn't like this, but they were sick, they were going to die, so it was humane. He'd wring their neck and throw them on the side of the chicken house, and then it was me and Gail's job to pick them up. That wasn't real fun. But we would use the electric cart, and we'd pick the chickens up, and then we would take them we had a fire where we would burn them. Mm-hmm. And we would have funerals for them when we burned them. So I met Ray our freshman year in high school in algebra class in the old high school on Main Street that's now the intermediate school. And I still remember what he had on that day. And that year we kind of had a rocky up and down. In fact, it all stems from I was helping him with an algebra question, And he couldn't get it, and I said, "Oh, you dummy!" And oh, that was a mistake. He didn't like that too much. But then, when he got over being upset with me, then I was upset with him. So for about a year, we kind of went back and forth, and he became best friends with my cousin Mike, who lived next door, so he could kind of get to be around me more. And after that, it was, I mean, once we started going together, that was it. And in our sophomore year, we had a teacher, Miss Wilkerson, she was a character. She would do anything to get your attention and keep you focused on class. In fact, she changed the whole curriculum when she found out we didn't know how to punctuate when we wrote a story. She just changed the curriculum and taught us all punctuation. I guarantee you anybody that had her class that year can punctuate a sentence now. But it was kind of frustrating. Ray was in the class before me, and we were having Shakespeare, and we were having Romeo and Juliet, and he just didn't see any point in learning that. And if Ray didn't see a point in learning something, he didn't want to learn it. So he and Bob Morgan, we had a test that was A to Z, and he wrote A to Z, and Bob wrote Z to A. And they both got one right, but that's when she found out that I was dating Ray. So she coerced me into start tutoring him, and so it was a good excuse for us to get together during the school week. So he went from failing to making A's. But why she was more important to him is at the time he was, we loved Uncle Hardy. He was a good guy, but he did have a temper, and he was always firing Ray and hiring him back, giving him a higher salary the second time around. But it was hard on a man in his late 70s shouldn't be raising a teenager, and so. In fact, he got mad at him and drove over his motorcycle on purpose. Well, that kind of did Ray in. He was upset. And so we still call him Coach Neubauer. But, he was our assistant principal at the time. He already knew when Ray was having a bad day, he was going to see him. And the teachers would send us for almost anything in those days. And if he wasn't behaving, he got sent to Coach Neubauer. And they'd end up talking about football, because he knew Ray's situation, and he wanted to keep him in school. So he made friends with him. And she found out more about Ray. She was the type of teacher that really cared about her students. And she had been in the Navy herself. And so she started talking to Ray about, she thought that would be a good option for him because of his family situation to join the Navy. And I wasn't all that keen on it because we were dating. I mean, we had secretly already talked about getting married when I was only 16. And, but I knew he was unhappy and he wanted to make his own way in the world, and she thought this was good for him, and he was 17 already. So at that time, you could enter the Navy even if you hadn't finished high school, as long as you could pass the GED, and he passed it with flying colors. And he went in the Navy, and I'll never forget that summer, because that was when at school we still took driving tests at school, and you had the class, and I had Coach Turk. Well, Ray was a really good football player, and when I had Coach Turk teaching me how to drive, the first 2 sessions, the man didn't say anything to me except turn right, turn left, stop. He didn't talk to me, and I knew he was mad, and I figured it was about Ray. But the 3rd session, he turned to me and he said, "Why didn't you stop Reed from joining the Navy?" Because he was counting on him to play football the next year. I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't really want him to go either." In fact, that summer was when Gail had her son Jason, and I babysat him that summer that Ray entered the Navy, and he had colic real bad. So when he would cry, I just cried with him because I missed Ray so much. But then for the next 2 years, he would, every 3 months, he would come home for a couple of weeks, or a whole week, 1 week, because he got a month off. And until he took his Westpac. And my senior year, on his Westpac, he was gone 6 months. And in those days, you couldn't just call, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have the internet. So we wrote each other every day, but we would number the letters because he was out to sea. And he might get 30 letters at one time, and he would know what order to read them in. So we would number our letters so we would know when we got them what order to read them in. And he did call me one time from Japan it was like 3 a.m, I think, when he called. I don't know how he got past my dad, but he was. But then we got, when we were getting engaged for real, even though we had secretly been already talking about it, my dad knew he was going to ask him if he could marry me. It was my junior year. And they were watching football together. And Ray was so nervous. He just didn't know what he was going to say, And Daddy finally had mercy on him. And he turned to him and he just said, "Not till she graduates." And then we celebrated by getting food out from Goodson's for our thing. And it was so funny because we got the wrong order from Goodson's to take out, and we got all this extra food. We had fried chicken, fried shrimp. We had all this stuff we didn't order, but it was too late to take it back. So we had a feast for our
And that was
engagement.
The original Goodson's.
That was the original Goodson's. Oh, the food was good there. Yeah. And another interesting thing I didn't tell you about Daddy is when I was young, he had a house-to-house route in River Oaks area. And in the summer, I would go with him to deliver eggs. And I'll never forget the year that Papa Top Again came out. He loved country music. And he would pump the brakes, try to make it interesting and fun for me. And he'd pump the brakes to Papa Top Again just to kind of keep me going. He knew every barbecue restaurant, hole-in-the-wall barbecue restaurants in town. And you'd look at it and you're like, oh no, but it would be the best food. Mm-hmm. And he would know, like at these drive-ins, he liked hot dogs, and he'd know the ones that were really good. You would think, I don't know if I want that hot dog. Oh, it was good. He knew what he loved food. So, but he would take me and he'd give me a couple of dozen eggs, and he'd say, "Now, this house, you just put them in the icebox in the garage. This house, you knock on the door, and she's going to pay you today. And this house, you might just go in their house and put the eggs in." And everybody called him Mr. Leonard. Since his eggs were Leonard's eggs, they called him Mr. Leonard all the time instead of Martens. And so, it was funny. The funniest time, I went to the store and these 2 little boys answered the door naked. They had towels around their neck and they were flying around and I'm like, oh my, because I wasn't that old myself. But it would save him time because I'd drop those off and he'd go somewhere else, and it would take, save him some time to help him.
Egg delivery service.
Yeah.
Interesting. How much time did y'all spend working versus there on the farm still maybe raising cows or whatever?
Well, we were Ray was always very involved in helping Mom and Daddy because he's very mechanical. Daddy had very large fingers, his kind of fat fingers. So he could know, working on the machinery was really hard for Daddy. And Ray just would pick up. Ray has been, in fact, for his 40th birthday, I think I counted, he had 14 different jobs, because when he got out of the Navy, for a while he was a mechanic. In fact, he worked at Western Auto, which is now D&W, and DNS, I'm sorry.
Lawnmowers, yeah.
Sorry about that, Steve. I know it's S. But DNS. Had a wonderful relation with them. Got really close with Billy Miller, who is a wonderful mechanic too. He's got his own place out there now, off of 2978. But he did that. And this is kind of a funny story too, because Ray had been being a mechanic, and then he went to work through a lady I knew at the time it was Equity, Tomball Savings and Loan, and then Equity Savings. One of the ladies I knew there, his husband was a security guard at Compact. Well, we decided, it might be better pay because he was part commission and all that. So he went to work as a security guard at Compact. And I had just had Jonathan, right? I've been off from work for 3 months. We've been having to pay our own insurance so that we keep our insurance those 3 months. And I just go back to work, and he comes home one night and he says, Nadine, I'm going to go back to school. If I go back to school and get my 2-year degree, I can get a job at Compact, and this will be really good. I said, well, Ray, we can't live off of my salary. How are we going to do that? He says, you tell me how much we need each week, and I will make it. And he went to school from 6 o'clock at night to 12 midnight, 5 days a week for I think it was 18 months. And I would tell him, well, Ray, we need $250 this week. He'd go find somebody's car to work on, do some work for Daddy, but a lot of times it was somebody else, and he'd always make what we needed. And when he got that, he couldn't go directly. He had to quit his job for 6 months to be able to be hired by Compact, because he couldn't go directly from being their security guard to working for them. Mm-hmm. So, and then when they would hire you they would hire you as a temporary to check you out, and then usually lay you off before they hired you full time, and that's happened to him. But Ray had worked there 15 years, and he actually was considered like an engineer. He was paid very well. I mean, they sent him all over the world. He was involved in the first development of the flat panel screen. He would go, when they were having problems, he would go figure out what the problem was at the plant. And it was really funny, one time in Mexico, they were having problems at this one plant that the boards it was coming in dirty. And they're like, what's happening to this? So he went and observed, and what it was, they were going to lunch and they weren't washing their hands, and they were coming back and finishing it up and packing them, and there was all this grease and stuff was from them eating lunch. So sometimes it was really easy. But he went as far as Brazil. He traveled all over the place. He went to California quite a bit. Oakland, he said he thinks he supplied the host city with box cutters, because his box cutters would disappear every day and he'd have to buy new ones. And we did live in California for 2 years when he was in the Navy. I didn't say that. I graduated 1 week and got married the next. And then what had happened, he had saved up his time so we could have a whole month for our honeymoon. They changed ships on him in the meantime, so he ended up a week before the wedding and a week after the wedding. And he ended up on the USS Cook. He had been on a freighter, the Wabash, the USS Wabash, and where he refueled ships, and he has a lot of stories with that. But then he was on the USS Cook, which was a fast frigate. Well, what ended up good about that is, even though he was stationed in San Diego, they dry docked him in Hunters Point, San Francisco. So I got to go live with him for 2 years in California. And that was crazy. I still remember I had been working at Guarantee Bond before they were bought out. And I remember my first salary was less than $500 a month. It was $400 and something a month working at the bank. And when I went to California, when we finally decided we would be there for a while, I went to work for Kelly Girls, and I got paid $682 a month. I just thought, boy, I was really getting paid good. And our naval housing was only $90 a month. It's the only way we could afford to live that way. They actually told you how to get food stamps in the Navy, the wives. And I was thinking, and then Ronald Reagan came in, and he raised salaries, and I thought, if the government's going to pay for your food stamps, why not pay the salary enough? I went to work so we wouldn't be on food stamps, because I was my daddy's daughter. I was not going to be on food stamps, but it was good that we were right there. And then every time we were going to add on or think about moving, something would happen. Like, Ray got laid off at Cameron Armworks. Then the story of he went back to school, and then he went on to Compact. Well, then, when they had the craziness, he worked for HP for a little while, but then they started laying people off. And he could have changed departments at the time, but he thought, I went through this at Cameron. I'm not going to do this again. I'm tired. So he went to work for another computer company for a while that was one of their vendors. And then they wanted to send him to communist China, to mainland China to work. And he was like, no, we're not going. The boys, Landon was in high school, Jonathan in junior high. No, we're not going to communist China at this point. And one of his old bosses wanted him to come to Chicago. He said, name your price. He was that good. He said, name your price. He looked at me, he says, how much do I have to make to move to Chicago? And I already knew he had been in Chicago when he was in the Navy, and he chose to get out of that school because the winter was so horrible. I mean, it snowed snowballs there, and he slipped. He ended up in the hospital hitting some black ice. And he chose to go on board ship and chip paint and paint the ship and take his course by correspondence to become a fire control technician because the weather. I said, there's just, you got to be happy. You can't do it. So after that, that was when he went to work for the county. He looked for a job. He said, I'm going to find a job that has a pension. And I am so thankful he did that. So even though it took him 6 months to convince them to hire him because he had made so much money before. But he said, look, I'm going for the benefits. That's what I want, And it was funny because he was only there a few months, and I think was David Ware, I think was his name, he got bumped up, and then they made Ray Park manager because he...
But through the years, did you keep cows? Or?
Yes, my mother's. Up until Mama died, right before Mama died, we decided to lease my aunt's land and run our own cows. Mama and my nephew was doing a lot of the work with her cows. And so we started our own cattle business. We call it 6NR Cattle. And the 6 is for our 2 sons and our 4 grandsons. And the NR, all of their names end with N, and they're all Reeds. And every time I tell somebody 6NR, they think it's Nadine and Ray, but...
Do you have
it can be either one. Yeah, it's 6NR.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Okay, I grew up with cows. I was never afraid of cows. I love the Beef Master brand, but we're doing Charbray mainly. But we have a Brahma bull. And we had some Brahma bulls when I was young. In fact, Daddy could ride his Brahma bull. But we had them so tame. They're like pets. And my son said, you've got to stop naming them, Mom. You got to stop naming them. He even had me name one of them Ribeye because he wanted me to remember what they were,
That's what they're for, right?
But it really is fun. I did not know they like bread. So if you have like stale bread, bring it to me because I feed it to the cows. And they just love it. And instead of our cows running from us, they run to us.
All right, we found this photo of Salem Lutheran School in 1902, and it looked like it was Herbert Martens.
It's got Herbert Martens, and that's my grandfather, GWH. Gustav William Herbert Martens went to school there. That is only like maybe a mile from the house. He could easily walk to school. Daddy walked to school also. This would have been where he went to school. Well, this is where my father went to school. They later built the building that we used to call the old parish hall, but it was really the old school building. His teacher, almost his whole time there, was Teacher Bisher. He taught them, and they learned in school. They taught German and English.
That's Buescher, right? Bisher.
Yeah, that's who Bisher Road is named after. But he lived to be over 100, and till the day he died, he knew my dad. He knew Bible verses by memory. He had a very good memory. He wasn't able to walk anymore, but he did really good.
It almost looks like the 1902 building was the start of
I would say it probably was. Germans don't waste money, so I'm sure they add on. Daddy talked about, and my Aunt Irma has a lot of stories about that too. The boys would dig holes for fun behind the school and do stuff at recess. That's what they did for fun sometimes, is digging holes. I don't know why they dug holes, but played different games. Gave them something to do, I guess.
That building's still there, right? That's what.
Yes, it is. Yes,
I've
it
heard
is.
It called
yes.
the Scout House, but
well, the Boy Scouts recently, I saw they've got a sign in front of it. They, as one of their projects, the church let them kind of fix it up. Paint it and everything. Now, this building down here is by Zion Lutheran. The Tomball Lutheran School, Zion and Salem were in partnership when me and my sister went to school. And this is where we went to school. This was a cinder block building. And later on, to the side, we built a brick building as we were expanding and having more children. And my dad was involved in the building of the other school building that was brick. Well, when we started going to Zion, they were having plans of having a family center. And the family center they originally were going to build was just going to be a tin building that wasn't going to be finished inside, and it was going to cost, I think, $600,000. Well, my dad got on the building committee, and part of the problem that was going to be so expensive is they were going to demolish this building. Well, Daddy came up with a plan to build over the building, and we ended up with a finished building for $400,000 instead of spending $600,000 on an unfinished building, and had rooms upstairs and a youth room. And
that's the campus there on Hicks Street.
That's
right?
on Hicks Street, yes.
That's where you went through 8th grade?
Right.
And this is you in high school.
That is me in high school. And my husband carried that picture for almost 50 years in his wallet.
And there's your cousin, Janelle.
Yes, Janelle. Janelle and I were good friends.
And Tim Martens, I was going to ask you, that's no relation?
No relation at all. Tim Martens and I have known each other since we were born, but we did not. We laughed because Gail had a guy in school with her named Kenneth Martens, but he was adopted, so he wasn't related to us. And then there was Tim Martens, so everybody always kind of teased us, well, why didn't y'all marry them and you could have kept the family name going? Because my uncle had a daughter and my dad had two daughters. So, and Arnold Martens, which was Janelle's dad, he fussed at Dad. He said, at least I had 5. And I tried to get a boy, but I couldn't get a boy. You should have got a boy, you know. And Otto Martens was Kenneth Martens' dad, and he was adopted. So technically, our part of the Martens is just carried on in other names. But the funny thing with Arnold, his wife Ruby, he said, if we have a 6th one, you're having it. So they cut off at 5.
Yeah. So this is you in the Honor Society, overall excellent.
Yes.
And here's you in high school, the National Honor Society. Mm-hmm. And this is you in FHA. Looked like
I was big in FHA. I was the president one year.
This looked like you were Officer of the Year this year.
Yeah, and I did get Officer of the Year. I think Miss Schmidt liked to make the President Officer of the Year every year. But we really enjoyed those years together. And the funny thing is, out of the top 10 in our class, 8 of us were from the Lutheran school. Mm-hmm. So we really had a good education at the Lutheran school.
This was your pep squad.
Yes, I was in the pep squad one year. That was fun.
This is your high school photo.
That was when they wouldn't believe I was a size 8 because I was so skinny. Oh yeah, these are now this. These pictures, there's a lot of the Lutheran school on this page too, and people I remember.
This is OEABOE. What was that?
Okay, I was in vocational office education. I decided, in fact, my cousin Burke was the one that made me decide not to be a teacher. I was going to go to college up until 7th grade, and when I watched their class, I decided there's no way I am going to watch kids all day. So I decided to go into vocational office education instead of going to college. And Miss Dowdy was fantastic on teaching us. She was tough, but we learned a lot. I mean, we were able to go out and get a job. And our senior year, we would work half a day. And I got to work for the school district. So I worked for Polly Parker, and he was a hoot to work for. He would come, I'd be eating lunch, and he'd say, Nadine, you got to get over there. There's nobody over there. I need somebody over there to answer the phones. Hurry up and get over there. I'd get over there, and every secretary would be there. He got me twice like that. I didn't even finish lunch just to get there. But he was such a good man. He was
a nice
really
fellow.
a lot of...
So this was dressed up.
Oh, yeah. We had the bicentennial my junior year. So we did our banquet. We did a fashion show through the years. And I got to be the Southern Belle because I was the only one that could get in the costume. So that was fun that year.
And here's your senior portrait.
And there's my senior portrait.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for the stories today and for coming and spending the time.
Well, thank you.
We appreciate hearing about your family.
I enjoyed it.